Welcome to the seminar series on cognitive robotics offered by the QMUL University of London. My name is Lorenzo Iamone, and today I am very happy to have Francesco Nori with us. Francesco is the head of the robotics lab at DeepMind, which is probably in the list of the 3 most exciting things you can do in your life in 2021. I'm not sure about what the other 2 are, but and I've been knowing Francesco for quite a long time. We actually met the first time in around 2005 in Italy, in Genoa, in a relatively small robotics lab at University of Genoa. And Francesco had the privilege of supervising me for my master for my master thesis, together with working with other group of people. And yeah, and then we worked together at the IIT in Italy, and so Francesco was a senior researcher at the IIT, and then recently he joined DeepMind, and maybe will tell us a bit more about that. And he has been leading European projects of collaborative research about robotics, and I think so. As you know, it's hard to define what cognitive robotics is, but when I introduce cognitive robotics, I say that, and cognition in general, I say that cognition is what allows people to do the amazing thing we do. There's a lot about doing things, doing actions, and exchanging forces with the environment. That's what a robot do. And some of the projects Francesco was leading in terms of European projects were really a lot about studying and understanding how humans exchange forces with the environment and between themselves when they do things together, and how to apply that to robots. And I think that was very exciting. And now DeepMind is working more on robotic manipulation and reinforcement learning, and I will leave it to him to talk about it more. Thanks a lot, Francesco, for being with us.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Lorenzo. Yeah, so I'm Francesco. As Lorenzo mentioned, I'm the head of the robotics lab. I joined DeepMind 4 years ago now, probably in August. And I created this slide deck specifically for this event. So it's kind of centered around a few things that we've been doing before I joined DeepMind, and then half of the presentation will be about recent results. But I really want to share with you my excitement in general around the environment that I found at DeepMind, and I wanted to sort of share with you this excitement and possibly convince you that deep learning can be very exciting, and it's very promising in terms of the technologies that we have to advance the research around the lines that Lorenzo mentioned. So physical interaction, physical human-robot interaction, and manipulation. So this is the outline. I'll start with a brief intro, then I will discuss about robotics at DeepMind, why we are doing robotics, and then I will present 4 different papers that you will find online if you are interested, about learning in different ways, learning many tasks, learning from first-person demonstrations, learning from many tasks from third-person demonstrations, for first-person demonstrations, and also from third-person demonstrations. So that's a lot of learning and a lot of demonstrations, as you will see. I think that demonstrations are really important in general. And then we will wrap up with the conclusions. Let's talk about DeepMind. DeepMind has a goal, and the goal is to study intelligence, and specifically artificial general intelligence. And it's important to understand also what I will discuss briefly later on, to point out that we have a definition, and a working definition of what intelligence is, and it's the ability to learn to perform well on a wide range of environments. And if you want, this is really connected to a very popular keyword, which is AGI, or Artificial General Intelligence. And the generality is really this ability to cope with a wide range of environments. And I think this is very different from what I did in the past, or what a lot of robotics is about. Robotics can be about solving one task that no one else can solve, and that's it. But this is not the flavor that we're doing at DeepMind in general, and specifically within robotics at DeepMind. We really care about generality, so being able to have one thing that does many things, and that will come back. I will come back to this later on, but just remember this, because otherwise you will not appreciate what I'm talking about. It's not about solving one task and hacking, all the subtle technical difficulties around it, but it's really about creating something that can solve multiple tasks, and that's a quite strong requirement. DeepMind was founded in 2010, joined Google in 2014. As I said, the mission is to solve artificial general intelligence. We like to think of it as the Apollo program for solving AI. We are more than 1,200 scientists now, and definitely I can guarantee that we're approaching science in a very different way, backed up by, of course, the Google budget. One of the key ingredients for artificial general intelligence, as opposed to narrow AI, is, of course, to cope with a wide range of tasks. But at the same time, there is another important bit, which comes together in a sense, which is the ability to learn from raw inputs. So try not to bake in your solution too much priors on the kind of task that you want to learn. And that's, of course, it's a never-ending debate in the robotics community, how much prior you want to bake in and you want to use when you want to solve a task. But I think that it's important to keep in mind that we always have this possibility, and we have two extremes that are very different. On one hand, you have the possibility of coding everything you know about the physics, about the robots, about the environment, about the geometry of the system, and this will limit the flexibility of your autonomous agent. Or on the other side, you will use the minimum amount of information, and in that sense you will be more flexible. But of course, then you will lack in the ability to generalize over tasks, and therefore there's a trade-off, and we need to be aware of this trade-off. And I think for solving general tasks, we need to remove as much of the priors that we always inject in our solutions to be able to cope with variety, and that's an important bit. So again, in order to have a very streamlined and lean way of doing this generality, we look really at the relationship between sensors and actions. And the paradigm that we are using is reinforcement learning. For those of you that are not familiar with the paradigm itself, it's a very simple principle. You have an agent that is sometimes called the controller, or a piece of code that will solve your task. And this piece of code has the ability to send out actions onto an environment, and this environment is giving us back observations. So the observations are the kind of information that we use to understand the state of the environment, to understand what we're doing in the environment. And this loop is the main one. This is the one I was referring to before. So we have actions on one side, an environment that can be anything you can imagine of, and then you get back observations. This is very, very general, as you can imagine, and that's why we adopted that DeepMind as a fundamental piece for reinforcement learning. There is one bit that is always underestimated, and it's where a lot of the prior information is actually injected in order to get a certain behavior from an agent and from a robot, or from the code that you write, which is this reward. And the reward is often associated with the idea of a measurement, a number that will tell you whether or not you're doing the right thing. But it's always where you start injecting priors, because me as a programmer, when I write a piece of code for solving a grasping motion, I need to tell the agent or the controller what is good from and what is bad in this description of the task. And it's a way that either you bake in and you just describe everything, and you just tell the agent to do exactly what you want, and therefore the reward is somehow not needed, but it's implicit in the way of coding the agent itself. Or if you want to optimize something, or if you want to do state estimation, or if you want to do some sort of adaptation and learn the dynamics of the environment, you need to tell what is the expected behavior from the environment. And this reward is something that I will talk about later on, because it's very difficult to find a reward that is general enough to cope with a variety of tasks. And this is of course an open challenge, but I will try to give you an idea of where we are going along this line as well. I forgot to mention, feel free to interrupt me anytime. If there is a question, I'm happy to take it immediately. Let's keep this very informal, not formal at all, informal therefore. But I can't see the chat, so if there is a question, please interrupt me, Lorenzo. You can basically take the opportunity to stop me and ask the question if there is any.
I will.
Thanks. So from reinforcement learning, the big ingredient for the things we're doing at DeepMind is to replace an agent with a neural network. So a flexible representation of a behavior that is mapping observations and action to actions. And the reward is just what we use to tune the weights of this big neural network that can have now billions of parameters. This is like really growing in terms of the structure, and you can really get amazing information baked in your neural network thanks to these huge networks and very complicated structures of the network itself. Just to mention a few of the things that were very successful in the past. One thing that we did was to playing and be able to solve Atari video games with a structure like the one I just described. In that case, it's sort of easy to look after the reward, because the reward is the score in the video game itself. So that was an easy call in a sense. And this is just a sketch of what that entails and what is the complexity we can have in this kind of benchmarks. On one side, we take as an observation the image that comes from the video game, and then this image is passed through a neural network that you see represented here. And on the right-hand side, what you produce is just one of the, I think, 20-something action that will play the video game. So movement of the joystick, the press of the fire, and any combination of these two. Was there a question or something? Perhaps a question. Let me double check.
There is a mention about mu0.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, I will briefly discuss about mu0 later on as well. Yeah. So this is a neural network, the neural network that, as I said, from images directly to the action space. The structure of the network is sort of relatively simple. At that time, it was just a bunch of convolutional neural networks and a bunch of fully connected layers. And as you can imagine, the specifics of this neural network, so the weights and the connections are unspecified, and you just train and learn what are the right ways to solve the task through optimizing the score in the video game. And these are the kind of behaviors you can get. This is a classical example, just wanted to mention. Breakout, the video game, classical Atari video game. At the beginning, the agent, as you see, is not doing much. This is after 60 minutes of training, getting a little bit of better results in terms of score. After 120 minutes of training, you can get slightly better. This is more effective now, but yet not much of intelligence here. But after some time, I think it's coming up next, it's kind of effective at bouncing the ball back. But one of the optimal solutions for this game, as you probably know, is to create a tunnel on the left-hand side of the screen and just pop the ball up on the top of the screen and just wait for the ball to do its job without bouncing it back. So just to say, you can get sort of very interesting behaviors. Yeah, then mu0 was mentioned, and I have indeed something along this line. Again, mu0 is a family of training and reinforcement learning solvers that we developed at DeepMind. And the history of Mu0 is that it started with Alphago, and Alphago is the one I will describe briefly here. It's a system that plays Go. Go is a game, a board game, an ancient board game that is extremely complicated. The reason why it's complicated is because at any turn in the game, you are supposed to take your stone, the stone of your color, and place it on the board. And the board, as you see, is extremely dense. It's an extremely dense grid. And you can place the stone anywhere on the grid. So that makes a big difference with respect to chess, where chess you have the boards already in the play, and then you just move one piece in a very limited number of ways. But here, when you place a stone, you can place it anywhere on the screen. So on the board game, sorry. The difficulty is that to play optimally, what you need to do is to, for each configuration of the game, decide what is the best move that you can do in order to win the game. And as you can imagine, since you can place the stone, so your piece anywhere on the map here on the chessboard, on the Go board, sorry, it's very complicated because you need to take an action out of an extremely huge dimensional space, because the configuration of the Go board are extremely numerous. And you also have an action space which is extremely high. So that makes this extremely difficult. The story goes that the Alphago software was able to defeat progressively the best software playing the game. Then in October 2015, the European champion, and finally the top player, Lee Sedol, in 2016. And I think this was really a game changer for DeepMind, because this was unexpected. The game of Go was believed to be extremely complicated because it might not be very popular in Europe, but it's extremely popular in Asia with a lot of players, and therefore it's supposed to be an art. And people study their entire life in order to play Go at the professional level. And there are schools and universities and advanced studies around the game, and it's a very old game. So it was really believed to be extremely difficult to hack and to crack as a board game. But this happened already in 2016, and as you can imagine, this was really a change for the history of my company. And just to mention a few of the things that were extremely relevant, I would like to mention some things that we did in with the Moosefield Eyes Hospital in the prediction of eye disease. If you like video games, I highly recommend you to look at AlphaStar, our equivalent of AlphaGo, playing in this case StarCraft, again from images down to keyboard and mouse actions, to play a very strategic and complicated game with partial information, and again a video game that it's extremely complicated for the strategy and the depth and the fact that you don't see the map, you need to explore the map, and many other things that are necessary to play the game. And this, we were able again to write the code that was successful at beating the best players and the professionals at the game. This is a collaboration with the NHS, and it was the idea is actually to have a sort of screening of 3D images. So the one you see represented in the bottom left is actually the information that is digested by the network, and then the network is used to recommend and predict what kind of diseases might be present in the data, and there has been quite a useful collaboration where we were trying to suggest how to look at the back of the eye. That's correct. So that's the idea. You take a retina scan and then you feed it back to the network, and the network is predicting the kind of likelihood of having a disease considering the scan of the retina. And then I wanted to share with you something which is not made at DeepMind, but I think it's extremely indicative of the kind of generality that we can nowadays achieve with neural networks. The first one is OpenAI DALL-E. It's DALL-E, or I think it's just a tribute to the painter DALL-E. So it's spelled in a different way, but it's called OpenAI DALL-E. And this gives you a good idea of what I mean with generality and what are the kind of things that we can do at DeepMind as well. But this is a publication by OpenAI. Nowadays, you can basically train a neural network. In this case, it's trained from captioned images that you can get from Google easily. And what you can do with this AI is to just give a text prompt, and then the network will generate images that are aligned, or they can be used, of which the caption you provided can be used to caption the image itself. So here you have a couple of examples. I really like the one on the bottom. So the text prompt that you can feed into the network, and there's an online API if you want to try, is something like an armchair in the shape of an avocado. And these are the images you can get. This is, as you can imagine, nothing that is available on images, on Google Images. There's no such a thing like an avocado chair. But this was basically imagined by the network, by just querying the network with the text prompt, and the image is what you get as an output. Or similarly, you can get the one on top, which is an illustration of a baby daikon radish in tutu walking a dog. And again, this is so specific that there's no way this was available online, but still you can get these amazing results just because of the generality of the network itself. And I think this when I saw these kind of things, this is really, really mind-blowing in terms of the generality of it. Also because you can just try the API yourself, and you come up with your description and you get the images out, and it's really fun to play with these kind of APIs. Another one which is extremely popular as well is what is called GPT-3. So on the left-hand side, again, you see this is a purely text-based neural network, so text as input and text as output. What the network does is to complete your prompt with the most likelihood output that can be generated after your prompt. And the prompt can be very, verbose, like the one you see here. The first one on the left-hand side is OpenAI researchers today released a paper describing the development of GPT-3, a state-of-the-art language model made up of 175 billion parameters. And then you have all the description here. And the interesting bit is that the completion of the way the network is finding what is the most likely follow-up of this text is actually quite perfect in terms of English, but also in terms of what the AI thinks this is about. So the output will be something like the researchers also found that GPT-3 is capable of generating samples of text that are indistinguishable from handwritten text, and so on. So I think this is interesting because the prompt can be absolutely general. And this is just one example. And I play with this quite a lot. I play every once in a while just for fun. I create my own prompt. And you get really reasonable stuff out, and it can be everything. So I took another example here. The prompt is the beginning of a function, which is defined as palindrome, check whether a string is a palindrome. And the output is the code in Python to do it. So, I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling to me, the fact that you can just come up with a prompt and get some, code out. So perhaps in the future, writing code will be much easier, and then we can enjoy doing other things. But that's the power of this. And then you have didn't find the same graphics for other things, but you can do really anything with this network. And again, this is just one network that you just prompt with the text, and you get something out which is very reasonable. So you can prompt, for example, something like, if the translation of chair is sedia, what is the translation of car? And this is the prompt. And if you do that, believe me, you get as an output that the correct answer, since sedia is chair in Italian, you get the correct answer, which is automobile is car in Italian, and so on. So you can prompt the very same neural network to become a piece of software that gives you code, but you can also get translations. Or something more related to cognition, you can ask the network to associate affordances with names. So you can prompt the network with something like, if the affordances of a potato are peel, slice, cook, bake, mash, what are the affordances of a laptop? And then you will find the correct answer. So the network will give you the correct answers. And this, I think, this is the kind of generality I'm talking about. So the very same neural network can, describe what OpenAI GPT-3 is, can write code, can translate code from English to Italian or English to other languages, and then can also come up with, a list of affordances for the objects that you can come up with. So that's kind of power you can do. I'll pause for a second because perhaps this the first part of the presentation, I believe. Yes. I don't know if you have questions or curiosity around this. It's probably the right time to do it. If not, if there are no questions, we can move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Francesco. I will also keep looking at the chat and moderating. If I see questions that I think deserve you to be interrupted, I will. Otherwise, we can also go through at the end. Okay, thanks. Let's move forward. Why robotics at DeepMind? Well, of course, because video games are not everything, and you also want to act on the physical environment. And acting on the physical environment is not easy at all. First of all, there is a control challenge. So a joystick will have like a very limited number of actions, but if you consider a 9 degrees of freedom arm or a 56 degrees of freedom humanoid, you can imagine that the control challenge is way different. The other bit is the real-world constraints. So dataset collection, as you know, it's very difficult in the real world, much more difficult than what you can do in simulating the game of Go or in simulating video games. There's wear and tear, so there's no stationarity in the system you're controlling. There is the issue of safety, so try to come up with a search space which is not destroying the robot after the first attempts. And you have sensor noise as well. Another important bit is that in order to solve a manipulation task, for example, you need a multimodal sensory stream. You need proprioception, you need vision, you need haptics, and all of them need to be combined in a proper way. And then you have a task diversity as well. So it's not just playing Go, it's not just about playing chess, it's not just about playing Atari video games, but the real environment we're surrounded about has a lot of tasks, and generality really is extremely big and huge in this context of robotics. So that's definitely, this challenge has all the ingredients we're interested in, plus the thing that we need to eventually act and be able to do things in the real environment, not just in a video game or in a software. Let's start with a very old paper published in 2018, which is about learning many tasks. So the idea and intuition behind it is that given the dimensionality of the tasks we can do in robotics, then when you start learning, you don't really know what the real goal is. And it's like a needle in the haystack sort of problem. It's very difficult to find what is the right action space. So what can you do meanwhile? But the idea is, if you don't know what the goal is or what you're trying to do, just keep on doing things and in a sensitive way in order to explore the environment around you. And this is not by chance that we are looking at babies here, because they play a lot and they're not really goal-driven in their play, but still they collect information that is very useful for doing goal-driven actions later on. So the problem is basically how to learn efficiently when the goal is the needle in the haystack.
And the idea is to take inspiration from human play and learn to activate, your stimuli and your senses deliberately by touching, moving objects, arranging objects, and doing things on a purely exploratory idea, just to see and see what is this space you are navigating. And then in the bottom part of this slide, you see what is the idea. The state space might be really, really sparse. But if you create islands in between your initial state and the final goal, then it will be easier to find the goal and reach the goal if you pop and jump from one island to the other. And there is a little bit of mathematics here, but the idea is that instead of having just one reward, one goal, you have multiple rewards, and some of them are intrinsic, so they are like related to your sensory stimuli, or they can be extrinsic, like given by someone else, like imagine a parent getting or inviting a child to do something in intermediate, to get to a final goal. And then you have a final goal, which is what you really want to get. What you do is just try all these different intentions, what we call intentions, which are the different intermediate goals at random, and just use the data that you generate in order to learn all the possible things that you want to do. So you trigger one behavior at a time, but you use the data for training everything. And then you can use your standard reinforcement learning algorithm to come up with an agent that solves not only the tasks you care about, but all of them. And we applied this in different contexts. So the idea is to have a high-level goal that you see here on the bottom right. So the goal is to, in this manipulation playground, is to put the red and the green block into the box on the right-hand side of the playground. And as you see, when the robot is untrained, so the very beginning, so there's not much happening besides some random movements, some motor bubbling. But then you can try to do to have this intrinsic motivation, which is, try to stimulate your touch, try to move things around, try to put objects one close to another, try to get in a very peculiar state of the environment, like, for example, in this case, stacking objects. So this is a kind of a unique configuration of the object that might be of interest because it's very unique with respect to the initial state of the environment. And then if you use the data that you generate by having all these intermediate goals, you end up learning very complex behaviors like the one you see here. Like in this case, the robot is successfully bringing all the objects into the playground. And hopefully there will be also, maybe in the next, let me see. Yeah, no, this one. So where you have like very elaborate behaviors where you first stack and then you use the two of them together to open the lid and put them in the box. That's the kind of behaviors that you can also observe, like very rich behavior that will generate from the fact that you're using these intermediate goals. And as I can imagine, this allows you to solve tasks that otherwise you won't be able to solve if you don't have these additional intentions or this exploratory behavior. And if you want, this paper is nothing but the idea that, in order to, solve a task which is extremely sparse, there's no free lunch. You need to inject some priors. And the priors in this case are these priors around exploring the space through learning intermediate behaviors that are reasonable for manipulation, I would say, like touching, moving objects around, lifting, trying to get them in a peculiar configuration. Oh, yes. And then we applied this on the real robot as well to learn a sort of a cute task. I really like it in a sense. This is the task we call bowling cup. So the goal is for the sawyer to bring the yellow ball into the cup. And as you see, it's kind of very good at it. And this was learned completely from scratch in 72 hours of training, just by observing images that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. So the agent could only figure out its own, configuration and can only figure out the position of the ball through the images that you see on the left-hand side here. So this is kind of, to me, kind of a very advanced control behavior, where you just use the images as they are, and you learn a controller that produces the right action in order to get this very dynamic task at completion. So I think that's a very interesting approach. But in connection with what I just discussed, you won't be able to get this particular behavior if you don't have a way to explore the space. In this case, the intermediate goals were basically to move the ball around, get the ball swinging, and get also the height of the ball up to a certain level. So it's just trying to get the ball well above the rim of the basket. So these were the additional information that we had to introduce in order to facilitate the exploration. Because otherwise, as I said, the robot is getting a reward only if the ball is in the basket, and that's it. There's no other information. The robot is getting the right information only if the ball is inside the basket. And we're now, you see, we're using the Vicon in this system, but we're now moving into a different setup that doesn't require the Vicon. The Vicon was used in this experiment just to detect when the ball is in the basket. So that's kind of funny, because it's really an overuse of the Vicon, which is instead for doing more complicated stuff. This is mainly about learning and exploring the environment without any prior information, or actually injecting the prior in the form of auxiliary intermediate rewards. But one way to solve and to simplify the exploration problem is also to learn from first-person demonstrations, and this is what I will discuss now. So we'll make the distinction between first-person imitation and third-person imitation. First-person is basically when you teleoperate the robot to perform the task. So in a sense, the robot is experiencing in first person the solution of the task. And I will then switch to third-person imitation, which is the natural one, the one we're used to as humans. So when we look at people doing something else, and somehow we can, through some sort of representation, we can translate what we see to our own motor system, and then use this knowledge to complete the task. And this is, of course, a very well-studied ability that humans have, and you probably know, are familiar with the concept of mirror neurons that are partly responsible for this ability that we have to transpose the experience of someone else into our own first-person experience. So I don't want to. Oh yeah, maybe I can go into the details of this animation. So the idea of this paper was to simplify the way of getting the first-person experience, but also at the same time to avoid the use of an explicit reward as much as possible. Because as you can imagine, explicitly writing down the reward for the task can be extremely complicated. And if you want a generality, then writing a reward that suits every task you want to perform is very difficult. So the idea was to start from demonstrations to get the first attempt to solve the task. There is a phase that we call the reward sketching, which is about trying to take a few demonstrations and associate a scoring to the demonstration itself. How well did I do in that particular demonstrations? Everything is stored in what we call the never-ending storage, which is a system to memorize and upload all the experience that we get from the robot. After this step, we can learn a function with a neural network that represents the reward. The next step is what we call batch RL, which is very similar to reinforcement learning that I described before, but this is done offline without any need to play back the the actions on the robot. And the final step is an evaluation, and then we cycle through this this loop a few times in order to get the evaluation reaching the performance that we're expecting. Let's start with the demonstrations. This is an example of the task that we were trying to solve. You have a variety of different shapes and different objects, and the task is to play with these objects in a playground. In this case, my colleague Serkan is grasping the green object and stacking it on top of the red. Once you collect this data set, you play them back to a person that is telling and sort of describing how good the action was performed. And this is represented here. So imagine, for example, that we want to label an episode, so a video, where the robot is executing a certain action, and we want to understand if that action is a stack of the green object on the red object. So what we do, we play back the on the right-hand side of the slide. You see, you play back the rollout of the action, of the attempt, and what the user is asked to do is the sketch that you see on the bottom of the video here. So you just need to draw a graph that will tell how good and how close to the task we are. So the top part is in green, meaning that when we sketch the profile of the curve in the green area, it means that the green is indeed on the red object. And before we try to sort of give a sense of how close we are getting to the object through marking a few key points along the video. Once you do that, what you need to do as a next step is to create a representation of these sketches by having a neural network that takes the video and the sketches as an input and predicts the sketch for any other video. So we do this by having the classical supervised learning approach, where you just train a network that takes a video as an input and produces as an output the sketch itself. And this will, of course, generalize over different actions. Third step is to do the reinforcement learning step. As I said before, this is a purely batch RL. We call batch RL a form of reinforcement learning that doesn't require the robot to perform the action, but it's just relying on the attempts that were executed before. In this case, we use a specific reinforcement learning algorithm that is called D4PG. We used a network with a memory that uses only the demonstrations to learn the task. Only 25% of the actions are task specific in each batch. Otherwise, they're not. And of course, what we try to do is to have very diverse data. And the output of this step is just to produce a neural network that takes as input the images and produces as output the action space. And then we evaluate the controller that we just trained on the robot and get a score. And if the score is the one that we expect, then we call it a concluded experiment. Otherwise, we iterate and we do the reverse caching again. The evaluation specifically is consists in just evaluating the controller that we just trained with the batch RL algorithm, and to record the episode in the data set that we use for the training. And this is what you get. I will not enter into the details. There are a bunch of nice videos on the paper. But the idea is that at the first iteration of this loop, you don't get really good performances. You mainly get just some grasp. But after just 3 iterations of the loop, you can really get efficient controllers that will solve the task from images. In this case, you see again the stack on red and blue, but there is a lot of diversity in the kind of tasks. We have all possible combinations of moving the red and the blue object in the playground on the different corners on top of one each other, put the red on this corner, the red on the other corner, and so on, and the blue on the third corner, and many other different tasks. Okay, and this was for the part of learning from first-person demonstrations. The next one is about learning multiple tasks from first-person demonstrations. Try to have a wide variety of tasks, not just, in this case, a simple manipulation task with 3 objects. This comes from the idea that in order to expand the number of tasks that you can do, then something very useful are what we call primitives, or hierarchical representation of the action themselves. On the right-hand side, you see quite a popular video that was kind of viral some time ago, where my colleague Nicolas was able to show that you can get very, very effective locomotion behavior, and actually quite diverse, even with a humanoid, just by doing pure reinforcement learning without prior information. So you can definitely learn rich behaviors from scratch with not much information, but this really requires a lot of task design. And in the video here, you could see how many different tasks we were doing. Like, this is running on rough terrain. Then the other one was running in a corridor full of walls, and you need to learn how to avoid them. And then the third one was, I think, running over obstacles. That's the one. So you see it running over obstacles. You can really get a lot of things, but it's really that data inefficient. And the idea in a recent paper that we did is that if you somehow create a hierarchical structure with pre-trained skills, then you can have better exploration, easier reward design, but also you can get more diversity. So in this case, again, it's a first-person imitation, because what we do is to use human motion capture data as the prior knowledge that we inject in the system. So we really use thousands of different motion capture data in order to create what we call a reduced action space that you can think of as primitives that will coordinate different degrees of freedom in order to create a simplified action space. By encoding all these clips that are motion capture clips, in order to predict what is, given the current state, what is the next action that is taken in the clip itself. By passing this information, so you start with the whole sequence contained in the motion capture data. You create a bottleneck of information with a classical encoder-decoder, which is kind of standard now in machine learning. You create this bottleneck of information, forcing this all information to be passed through what we call a latent representation. That is eventually the one you will use, but you use the very same latent to reconstruct the big part of the information. In this case, you don't reconstruct the entire clip, but you just reconstruct conditioned on the present state. You reconstruct the action that was needed to move from one current state to the next state. And this is enough to represent what is needed by the second step of the algorithm. The second step is represented on the right-hand side, which, just to make a long story short, what you can do is just to forget the details of activating every single muscle in your body, but just use the decoder that you trained in the previous representation to decide a high-level action space, which is this latent variable or the bottleneck of information, which represents a coordinated action. So instead of having the duty of controlling every single muscle, so you somehow have coordinated actions that you can use to simplify the search space again. And if you do so in a reinforcement learning setup, you can learn an arbitrary task, again, just by looking at observations. And instead of controlling the action space, so the muscle activation, you control this latent intermediate action space that is that represents the primitives in the system. And by doing so, you can do kind of a lot of different tasks. The first one represented here is a tracking motion. So on the left-hand side, you see a purely motion captured demonstration that was not in the set of motion capture data displayed and used during training. That is not physically consistent. You see that, for example, the gray avatar is actually penetrating the ground and is sort of either floating or definitely not consistent with the ground, because it's just a motion capture playback, while the orange avatar is instead a physical avatar, so needs to execute the motion by taking into account gravity and taking into account also the contact with the environment. So you can get basically a way to generate and imitate a motion capture by simply providing the motion capture, and then you can replicate on a physically realistic simulation. This is another one. This is again not something that was in the set of clips that were motion captured. This is a task where the avatar is supposed to, again, jump over obstacles. What I want to flag here is that since we have this prior of the motion capture from human data, now the running is very realistic, because in this case, the only feasible actions are consistent with the data set of 1,000 different actions that we used to pre-train and to limit the action space itself. So you get these very realistic motions. And as a last cherry on top of the cake, this can be extended to a very complicated task, which is a task of running again over gaps, but instead of using proprioception and sort of knowing the position of the robot with respect to the environment, this task can also be solved by having first-person view. So the image that you see on the left is the only information, together with the position of the body, that is provided to the agent in order to solve the task. So it's really a minimal information because it's a first-person view, and everything else is hidden to the network. So the robot doesn't, the agent doesn't know where are the gaps with respect to the robot. It's just the images will tell the robot where the gaps are. And I think this is pretty impressive, considering that the network is really just using this information to produce the right action, so the right stride in order to jump over the obstacle. And then the last paper that I want to mention is very recent, and I think it really opens a new perspective on imitation. And this is the first paper that we published on learning multiple tasks from third-person demonstrations. And I think that's extremely interesting, because third-person imitation is extremely difficult. So what is third-person imitation? Well, it's represented in this slide. So imagine that you provide a video of a person solving a task. In this case, is again a stacking task. So you grasp an object and you put it on top of another object. And what you want to do is to, you want the robot, in this case is in simulation, but you can imagine you can do the same on the real robot. You want the robot to imitate the very same task that was seen in the video that was provided. And this video shows what you want the robot to execute, considering the video on the left-hand side. Why is this so difficult? But you can imagine why this is difficult. First of all, when you provide the video, when you provide the only information that you give the agent in order to describe the task, the robot doesn't have, and the agent doesn't have access to the actions. So there's no way you know when you're looking at someone doing a task, there's no way you can know the muscle activation that the person is using. You just see the result of that muscle activation, but you don't know the muscle activation. Somehow you can infer it, and this is what we are looking after in this paper. The second one is that there's no signal that tells you what is good from what is bad. The only signal that you have is this image. And when you do it in first person, it's very different from observing someone else doing it. So there's no way you can create a reward out of this sequence because everything is different. And also, what is difficult is that when you execute the motion, you don't have a way to understand what is the position of the person, or you don't have a direct measurement of the position of the person. What you only have is a view over the person doing the task, and that's it. And of course, the big challenge is that the gripper can be very different as well. I mean, my body is different from yours, and still I can look at you doing something and I replicate that task. And this is more or less the same here. We stretch this to the extreme. So the grippers that we're using is a parallel gripper, but then we use very different things like a human hand. We've been using a simple gripper, or a three-finger gripper, which is very different from the parallel gripper. So extremely different. Let me see if there is a question here. I will go through these details and I will answer this question in the rest of the talk. So the secret weapon to do this transfer is what we call a manipulator independent representation. So in a sense, what you want to get is take the image stream on the bottom of this slide, where you see a demonstrator executing the stacking of the red object on the blue one. And what you want to do is to code the action, the observation, so the video, into a space which is represented here as a two-dimensional space, where if the robot is doing the very same action, so if the object's movement and the object movements are the same, but the gripper is different and the illumination is different, anything else is different, somehow this very same position of the objects only will map to a point which is very similar or very close in this space, in this representation, what we call near, manipulation independent representation. They are very close in this embedding or in this space. So it's a magic transformation. I understand at this stage it's just pure magic, but imagine that you have a representation that will map the bottom video, and specifically one picture in the video below, to the very same picture if the position of the objects is the same, but everything else can be completely different, but you really care only about the objects. And then I will tell you how you build this manipulator independent representation. That's the secret sauce, right? That so far is just fiction. It's just, I'm just saying, you take two images and you forget about everything in these images. What you just care is about what is the position of the red, green, and blue object, and that's it. I just want to have this representation. How can I train this representation is the secret sauce. Before moving into details of creating this representation, I want just to spend a few words on how you then imitate. Once you have the representation, what can you do to imitate something? And the imitation part is relatively easy. What you do is you take the goal. So you take the goal that you want to execute. You take the current observation, so the first person observation, what you are doing right now. You create and use this mirror representation, so this manipulated invariant representation, to produce these two embeddings, to these 2 points in space, and then this information is provided to a policy, a controller that will produce the action to bring the goal to bring the observation as close as possible to the goal. And this is the signal that you use as a reward, and that's the only one. So you use reinforcement learning by just using internally this manipulator independent representation. This is the only information that is needed to optimize the reward of getting the observation close to the goal that you specify through the reward that you see down here. But let's go back to the representation itself. How can we create this magic representation? What is the secret sauce here? We have 3 ingredients. The first one is what we call a cross-domain alignment. The second one is temporal smoothness, and the third one is an actionable representation. I have 3 slides for each of them. Again, this representation is nothing but a representation that takes an image, ignores everything, but just focuses the attention on what is relevant, in this case, the position of the red, blue, and green. So how do you do this? The first ingredient, as I told you, is a cross-domain alignment. And for doing this, what you use is to train a network which is extremely robust towards what the things that you want to ignore in the images. So in order to do so, you use a lot of domain randomization, which is just a way to hallucinate the representation in such a way that eventually the information is so diverse that will be ignored. And you align this representation either with a video which is synchronized with this video, but doesn't have the arm. So this is a way to force the representation to ignore everything but the objects in the playground. So you see here in the invisible situation, the objects are moving magically, and this is possible because this is done in simulation. So this is a purely simulated environment. So you can just remove the gripper and do exactly the same movement. And in order to force a representation which is ignoring the arm completely, you do the very same trick, but in this case, randomizing the arm. And this will create a representation which is extremely resilient to, or ignoring the presence of the arm, because the information is so random that eventually it's better to ignore the arm itself. The second need is to have a representation which is temporally consistent. I don't have much time to discuss this into details, but the idea is you need to have a signal that will tell you when 2 representations are aligned in time, or when they are instead quite apart in time. So this is just to say, I want a representation that if the objects are exactly in the same position, I want the representation to be very, very similar. If the objects are the same objects, but they are in different positions, then progressively, the more distant they are, the more this representations should take into consideration that the objects are not in the position I want to have. I want them to be. This is a technique that is quite standard in machine learning. It's called time contrasting network, and we just did a minor modification in order to make this representation smoother than the classical one used in literature. And then the third ingredient is to have a representation which is actionable. And this is definitely something that it's very similar to the encoder-decoder representation that I mentioned in the humanoid example, where you force this representation to be such that it can be used to understand, given 2 images, what is the action that is required in order to bring the first image into the second one. So it's just a way to force the information of the action required to move from one frame to another to be present in the network itself. And that's I don't enter into the details, but the idea is that you force the network to be able to predict the action that brings you from one image frame to the other one. And yeah, that's basically it. You just join all this information, so all this aligned simulation in a single data set, and you train the manipulator independent representation through combining these three different ingredients through three different losses. So one is the cross-domain alignment, the second one is the temporal smoothness again, and then the action model representation as a third. And I come to the results, and that's the end of my talk. So this is one example. It's actually quite one that works quite well. You just provide the goal, and you see on the top of the slide what the goal is. It's just the action that was showing at the beginning. So you grasp the red object and you put it on top of the blue, and this is what you get eventually on the agent. This is a similar, as you see, a very similar and kind of surprisingly good imitation of the goal depicted on the top. And then these are other examples. I think that those are kind of good ones. Again, I'm not sure why. Oh yeah, this one is working now. You can have imitation. It's sort of twisted upside down. So the goal is actually the real robot executing the task, and the imitation is done in simulation. So it's a real to sim transfer, but doesn't really matter. What really matters here is that this representation is strong enough to cope also with the noise typically present in real images. This is again same real images, a person using one of these grippers to do the very same task is red on blue again, and on the bottom you see the imitation. And the third one, which is sort of struggling with loading, is a three-finger hand executing the task and a two-finger parallel gripper imitating the task. So again, the difference in this case is just the gripper simulation on both sides. Okay, so that's the end of the talk. I think I'm convinced, and I hope you will be convinced, or you progressively will be considering the possibility of trying to see what deep neural networks can do to represent complex control actions. I think this is really a game changer. Since I moved at DeepMind, I'm impressed by the complexity of the control actions that we can replicate using this deep neural network representations. These controllers can be learned on the real system. Of course, the data represent a big bottleneck. In order to cope with the bottleneck of information, we need to have some sort of additional information that can be injected in different ways. I presented you today the ability to inject information in the form of auxiliary rewards, hierarchical representation, and third-person imitation. And yeah, that's it. I'm happy to take any questions if there is any.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Francesco. And we do have a question. You can stop sharing your screen if you want. Maybe it's not unless you want to keep it. But yeah, it's up to you really.
Just in case.
Yeah,
I will.
Okay, so Kaspar, do you want to ask?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks for the fantastic talk. Good to get an update on your work. Really, yeah, impressive results. Just wanted to, I mean, you spoke a bit about the prior knowledge at the beginning and whether to incorporate it or not. Just wanted to hear your opinion on work or presentation I've seen from a colleague from Mitsubishi. And so he was arguing prior knowledge should go in there, and the neural network should be only used to learn the difference or the residual aspects. And he was saying that, I mean, he was using classical physics engines, you know, analytical models as the base, so to speak, and then saying that was actually a biological model behind it. And I asked him, really? And so he said, yeah, he had spoken to cognitive scientists, and they have told him that we in our brains develop something that is similar to these physics models that we know. So yeah, so he had a very different approach there, and I wanted to hear your view on that.
Yes, well, it's a very good question. So I think it's very subtle to understand and come into terms and be on the same page when it comes to where are we injecting the prior. And I think this is so underestimated because it's difficult to use the same language. So let me try to give an answer to this. When I do MPC, which is model predictive control, and I write down the equation of motion of my manipulator, that is a way for me to inject the prior. That's a huge prior, and these are the physics, and that's the best model you can come up with, and this is used to do MPC and to solve the task. A simulator is coding the very same equations, just in a different way, and they're not explicit equations in the forms of cosine, sines, and all these mathematical laws, because they can be like very complex numerical procedures for solving a specific step in the simulation environment. But the very same information is in the simulation, right? So if I'm using the simulator, instead of coding explicitly the simulator, but I'm using it to get the observation and get everything else, I'm basically using the same amount of prior information. So no big deal in that sense to me. We can use it, and still the fact that we're using it is the big changer, because we are putting a lot of priors. What you mentioned is also something that is I think humans do have some sort of elasticity in the representation of their own systems. They don't have pre-coded representation of their specific body, because everybody is different. I mean, if you take myself, I'm very skinny, and if you take someone a little bit chubbier, there's a huge difference in the dynamics of my model. So there's no way this is pre-coded to the details. So there is some flexibility, and therefore, that part, I think it's extremely, shouldn't be there. We shouldn't put that prior information there. So the total mass of my body, in a sense, if we want to be biologically plausible, we shouldn't put it there, because it's not something that should be there. But if you have one robot sitting, in your warehouse, and that's the robot that will never change, then of course you can use it, because the mass of the robot will never change. But if you want to have a flexible algorithm that can cope with all possible robots on the market, then perhaps you better not code that specific value and then be flexible to it. And this is like, as well, in classical robotics, as you know, adaptive control and online estimation. These are kind of things that are standard. But I think it all boils down to the amount of information we want to bake in and the flexibility we want to get from our system, and that's very tricky. And I don't think there is a free lunch. Even most of the things that I showed you, they have a lot of prior information. Specifically, the last one has a lot of information about the use extracted from the simulation environment. But the simulation is giving you not only the physics, but also the rendering. So the visual appearance of what we are looking at. So it's extremely, extremely, extremely rich in terms of priors, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's no free lunch. Really, since I moved at DeepMind, I really understood how much prior we need to put in order to get what we want. And then, of course, if you want to have a very general behavior, then you need to have less prior. It goes without saying, right? So that's why probably people might be skeptical, because the mission is different. We try to be very general, and therefore we don't bake in our system information that people are like, no-brainer, I want to put it in my system, because it's reasonable in a certain context, but our context is slightly different.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I was also making this point clear that the priors do come in somehow, in your case, through the simulations. That makes sense. I hadn't seen that. Anyway, I have to run away now. I'm already late for another meeting, but it was great seeing you. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon in person again.
Thanks. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, Kaspar. I don't see at the moment other question in the chat. I have several, of course, but I start with a very, very general one, which I'm sure you heard like tons of times. Can you give us the feeling of the amount of data and the amount of computational power that you need? Let's take like just one of the examples that you make. For example,
Yes.
the last one, or the cube stacking in general. So what is the
it's a good question. So I think the real advantage here is that when you do research, you abuse of the tools that you have, and we definitely abuse of the fact that we don't have a cap on the number of computational resources we can use. And then once you settle down, then you can reduce the amount of information, the amount of code, the amount of computing that you need to get a center behavior. But initially, you are extremely, generous with the amount of the speed at which you are running experiments. At the moment, I think when we learn these kind of behaviors for the stacking that I was showing you, we are using something around 6,000 actors, so 6,000 copies of the environment for 5 to 6 days running. So it's like 6,000 simulations running for a week or a couple of weeks. And then it really depends. The simulations in this case are kind of heavy because they include the rendering. So that's more or less 6,000 CPUs running as a sort of a scale. But it really depends on a number of ingredients that are also kind of new technologies that are emerging around optimizing also the number of CPUs that you need through parallel computing. So at DeepMind, we also have access to the TPUs, so the tensor equivalent of a GPU or CPU, sorry. And these can do a matrix multiplication with a single clock, with a single instruction. So if you can reorganize your code in such a way that you're using matrix multiplication instructions, that you get a huge benefit without using too much actually computing, because it's in hardware matrix multiplication is done with just one clock. So that's it's really a game changer in terms of speeding up. But it really depends, because it's a trade-off. Sometimes we need to use CPUs because the TPU is not available. It's as I said, we are probably not the right person to ask this question, because we can abuse of this whole abundance of computing, and therefore we don't optimize the computing itself. But yeah, they definitely are. They have quite a cost in general. But it's the research that has a cost, and then if you probably compare with big efforts like the particle accelerator at CERN, that we are doing research. So we need money. We need this kind of computing, and I think it's sort of an excuse to an extent, because the very same research is done by Stanford. The very same research can be done by CMU, for example. They do excellent research in this area, comparable with ours, if not better. And they don't have this privilege. They just, cope with the limitations they have. But for sure, for us, it's no-brainer, because we have the data center, we have access to them.
Okay, I see. No, it's a good point that actually, although it, of course, maybe facilitates some aspects, is not necessarily the bottleneck. I mean, yeah, as you say, other people are doing similar research and getting results, and not necessarily with the same facilities. I see a few other questions, but maybe I will go with just another one. You mentioned in I like this magic mapping part, and the one ingredient that you mentioned is so the first one was related to attention, so to finding out what aspect of the scene should be considered, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So if we like, I don't know, I'm sure you also for you, but I mean, these things reminds like the earlier, let's say, work or thinking about visual attention, right? So what we do as humans, I mean, we, of course, when we look at something, we cannot pay attention to everything, right? And we decide what to pay attention to, both in terms of visual attention and in terms of mental allocation of attention. So in this case, you are telling the network what to pay attention to. And then based on what you tell, then the network understands and it's able to generalize, right? It's not understanding by itself what to pay attention to.
No, indeed, the losses that I mentioned. So the one where you have, for example, two videos, one with the robot executing the task with domain randomization, the other one just showing the objects moving from one place to another with no arm. So that's exactly a lot of prior to say, you know, I don't care about the arm, I don't care about, you know, the playground, I just care about the objects. And this is a way to force, as you mentioned, the attention in a very implicit way, if you want. Because what you're just saying is that I give you, you know, the invariance or the noise that will force you to forget about all the information I don't care about and just focus on the one I care about. I think that's a very interesting point. There is something extremely popular recently that is the transformer architecture. And that one is very powerful because it's an attentional mechanism on different sensor modalities that doesn't have, you know, it's just an attention system in the sense of a window that can move around the image to select the information and move around your other sensor modalities to understand what is the right information to pick up at that moment. But in that case, the structure of what to look at is not given, it's learned from data. And this transformer architecture is extremely powerful, for example, for getting the results on GPT-3. So GPT-3 is the one I was showing on the video on text completion, because to understand what is next or what is relevant, you don't need to look at the words one after the other, but you need to jump across. And this is very dependent on the sentence itself, right? How it is constructed. So these transformers can do that. They can jump the attention and look at different words in a completely, you know, in a way which is completely driven by the sentence itself. So it's not baked in, like look at you know, the subject and then the verb, because the subject and the verb they shuffle around in every different sentence, right? You need something more flexible than that, and this transformer, I think, is really doing that in GPT-3. So it's extremely powerful.
Okay, and yeah, thanks. That sounds very interesting, and to me it reminds the discussions about the economy of perception, the fact that which is a lot about ecological perception and affordances, because it's really about understanding what information to pick that is relevant to what you want to do. So yeah, it sounds very interesting, and maybe I can relate this to, there is a question again, general, what is next for DeepMind? What are the next set of problems that you are looking at? I can put in, is this something you are interested on, or maybe not really? This transformers or
so I can reply in a couple of possible directions. So one is multimodality. So if you want to reply to DeepMind specifically, I already the example of the prompt to get an image. So the fact that OpenAI is working on, you know, prompting a text and getting an image out of it. This is, I think, something still a little bit unexplored. So it's something that, in general, we want to go beyond, not just, as you can imagine, text and images, but you can expand to anything else, including sound, for example, or videos. and trying to get you know, a video. Once you put the text, you get a video out with sound and everything. This is in the direction of multimodal representation. In robotics, I think we want to understand if we can scale up the diversity of tasks. You've seen a lot of manipulation with stacking objects, but we want really to go beyond that particular action and being able to cope with a variety of different tasks. And this comes with also a variety of objects. So go beyond simple objects and more household objects, more natural objects, but also a variety of different tasks like you typically have in different contexts, like while you're cooking or when you building an IKEA chair. These are the kind of things that people are sort of doing a lot. The follow-up question is on the number of minutes. Yeah, as I said, we use like often like at least 6,000 CPUs at the same time. Or if not, we use TPUs, and also TPUs, they come with this advantage of doing parallel computation, but in hardware. So it's similar to GPUs, but more like matrix multiplication. And this is, therefore, it might take a few minutes to do things, but there is this underlying new hardware architecture that allows you to do operations which are very basic, like, as I said, matrix multiplication, but just in a single clock time, which is extremely fast, as opposed to, you know, using quadratic in the number of elements in the matrix, number of steps. So this is really a game changer.
Yeah, there is another question which I will try to summarize because it's very long, but yeah. Basically it's about reinforcement learning. And one question is about whether there are algorithms that are more better than others and how to train them. And I think maybe the answer can also be related, let's say, if a student has to approach reinforcement learning, maybe where to start. And I don't know if you have advice there. And yes. Then a more general question is how to integrate deep learning, deep reinforcement learning with symbolic reasoning, if that's something you have any comment about.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So for the first question, I'm not an expert in actually training neural networks, so I might not be the right person to answer, but I can give you the perspective of what I've noticed in terms of when it comes to training a neural network, what are the most stable code bases around. First of all, I recommend you to look at the literature because there are papers. I think the computer science community is extremely healthy in that sense. They always try to come up with papers that just discuss, you know, I downloaded this bunch of different open source software and open source reinforcement learning algorithms, and I just tested them, varying the parameters and seeing the convergence rate or the performances. So there are papers, for sure, one that addresses Q-learning and PPO. There is a paper out that where you can see and get a sense in a very, it's from Google, it's a paper from Google, where they have tried to solve a really huge number of problems with the same algorithms and trying to look at the robustness of these algorithms in terms of convergence. Unfortunately, and I think that's something that I put my my heart at peace with, but there are no very solid analytical proofs that these methodologies converge. The reason is that these algorithms and these representations are extremely complicated, so they come with quite a burden in terms of numerical computation. So the only guarantees are numerical themselves. So I think I gave up on thinking that everything has to be proved analytically, because it's very difficult to prove something analytically for the complexity of the things we are now dealing with. But if it is an analytical monster, if it is a numerical monster, you can approach it with another numerical monster. So at least you can get some interesting guarantees by having and running very thorough numerical analysis of what the algorithm is doing. So I gave up on a little bit on the analytical side, even though there are good results in that sense, and I encourage you to read these papers because they're really enlightening. But at the same time, don't underestimate the power of approaching these convergence problem with numerical solutions as well. And these papers are really going in this direction. So they use, another neural network if you want to prove that a neural network is working or an algorithm is converging. And the second question is how to design hyperparameters. I think
yeah, I think more. Sorry, maybe more. Sorry if I jump in, but maybe even more interesting the deep learning with symbolic reasoning. So the reinforcement learning with symbolic reasoning.
Yeah, there is a lot in this direction. Really a lot. The things that I like the most, and if you want to check it out, is it's kind of a standard paper. It's called Monet, and it's unsupervised representation that allows you to get something very similar to what we discussed with Lorenzo. So imagine that you have a set of images with different objects, and you want just to have a network that segments all the objects independently and puts the attention on the objects themselves, which is extracting a symbolic information from low-level data and raw data like images, and then on top of that you can build something else, and this is what we have been doing actually. So you can take raw images, extract the symbolic information, and then from the symbolic information build all your representation. I think that's something that is extremely popular in these days. Not to mention causality, which is also something that people are really looking into. You want to have causal representations where you're certain that there is the right causal relationship between the things you are analyzing. And again, graph neural networks are very popular in that sense to get and to impose this causality into your representations. Again, to get this kind of behaviors, you need to inject a little bit of prior, but just the right amount of prior to get this symbolic output out of the network you're training. But that's definitely possible. And again, I think this is really interesting stuff.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. I put in the chat a link to the Monet architecture you mentioned, if anybody's interested. And yeah, I think this is fantastic, and we took a lot of your time, Francesco. I think we can close here. I was happy to hear a lot of exciting things, and also many of them echoing some general concept that we saw in the cognitive robotics module, such as attention. You mentioned causality recently, a different way of reasoning, reinforcement learning, of course. I think it was very informative for the students and for everybody else. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation, and I'm available. Just reach me out on different social networks, LinkedIn, if you want to know anything more about what I'm doing.
Okay, yeah,
thanks.
Fantastic. And I think it was a great way to close this seminar series offered by QMUL. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for attending, and Francesco for sharing with us.
Thanks, bye.